All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. If you would, again, if you're coming in, please mute your lines. Just helps us with the feedback on this end. So good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. We are recording this webinar, so we will post it on the website once we are done. It does take us a bit to post it because we have to pull it down and then upload it to our website. So give us a few days, please, to get that on our website, but we will get that up for you. This is the Grantee onboarding for the Georgia Investments and Housing Grant. I am Jen Wade. I'm the Grants Division Director over at OPB. We also have with us Jonna West, who's the OPB Grants Manager, as well as the person that you all probably already know, Shelly Toms. She's the OPB Grant Specialist working on this program. And then we have David Luker on with RSM. David, are you with us?
I'm here, Jen.
Perfect. All right. Well, again, thanks everybody for joining us. We're going to essentially go through the next steps, some expectations and everything. And we're just going to start with the FAQs that we have. A lot of your questions, can everybody see my screen? Can y'all give me a thumbs up if y'all can? Okay, perfect. A lot of the questions that can be answered are already in our post-award FAQs. So we strongly encourage you to go to that post-award FAQ document. It has applicable information for 2 CFR 200, payment requests, reimbursement requests, environmental review, where that is applicable. A lot of you have construction, so those may be applicable to your projects, and some just general FAQs on the state fiscal recovery funds. All right, so let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger. Okay, so just first and foremost, we want to outline the expectations of the grant. So this is funded through the state fiscal recovery funds under the American Rescue Plan Act. There are federal guidelines attached to the funds. The state fiscal recovery funds are grant funds under ARPA, so they're not loans. So regardless of whether you're using this as a loan structure or not, these are grants with specific federal guidelines that are attached. It's the subrecipient's responsibility to review and understand the requirements of agreeing to the federal funding. And just so you're all aware, 2 CFR 200 policy requirements are applicable to these funds. So everything from, it includes, your single audits of those of you who receive over $750,000 or more are required to do single audits, competitive procurement, among others that we're going to highlight for you throughout the presentation. Again, we're going to high level kind of overview with these. We could go really weeks on 2 CFR 200, which I'm sure none of you want to hear because I always joke that it's like Charlie Brown's teacher. As soon as I say 2 CFR 200, it's like womp, 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 womp. So we try to make it as painless for you as possible, but we definitely want to make sure that you are aware of and understand the requirements that we are required to have from the federal government that trickle down to you as subrecipients. We got a few questions on this. Do want to highlight that Davis-Bacon is applicable to these projects. It is applicable to any project whose total project costs, that is your CRF funds, CF, state fiscal recovery funds. I'm getting CARES and this mixed up. Plus any additional funding that you have, whether you have a home, HTF, something from DCA, your matching funds, things that are going to be on this project. So total project costs of 10 million or greater, you are required to comply with Davis-Bacon. And another thing that David, I would like for you to talk through at the end when we get to it is just the contract. So your vendor contracts are required to have specific language that Treasury outlines. And so I'll let David get to that. There are specific clauses that you must include. It's really small for me to read, so I'm going to try to. All right. Awardees will be expected to align to the affordability criteria that was outlined by Treasury in final rule, the state's application, the OPB website, the attestation signed by awardees, and within the terms and conditions agreement. This affordability language is as follows directly from final rule and in our program. Treasury's eligible income levels outlined in the final rule are defined as low or moderate income households and communities, with those with income levels at or below 300% of the federal poverty guidelines. for the size of the household based on the most recent published poverty guidelines by the Department of Health and Human Services, or income at or below 65% of the area media income, little typo there, for the county and size of household based on the most recent published data by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Just a note on that, we did note in the application on the website and all the criteria that we published for this, the eligible activity for this grant program was developed based on, again, final rule, where it outlined that the test was based on anything eligible under HOME or HTF, the Housing Trust Fund program. And we did note the same thing that Treasury notes in the final rule, that those programs have different definitions for the AMI, for the affordability piece, than Treasury does. So we've put that back in there. All right, going forward. The awardee's affordability metrics will be captured throughout the subrecipient monitoring process. So we do have a very robust subrecipient monitoring process that David will talk through with all of you, and your metrics will be captured there. So if you have other funds, for example, if you have funds under HOME or HTF or another program that gives you flexibility in the AMI or FPG, you should track that separately. Those separate funds have whatever policy requirements are attached to those through DCA, et cetera. But for state fiscal recovery funds received from OPB, those affordability metrics must be met. Again, you sign the attestation, it's in the terms and conditions, and we will check to make sure that whatever funds in the project are spent with the state fiscal recovery funds align to that. So awardees will not be reimbursed for costs associated with the project that are dated back prior to the award approval date. So we did mention this throughout the application process, that it is based on a project period, and that project period starts when the grant moves from awarded to approved. That is signed terms and conditions, your vendor management form, and the processing of that, which does take a little bit, and the final budget approval. Awardees have 60 days to sign the terms and conditions agreement under this program. If you feel that you cannot meet the obligations of the program, we just ask that you notify OPB of the intent to decline the award as soon as possible so that we can potentially look at re-obligating the funds. All right, so we're going to go further into this. So the webinar will provide additional details for subrecipients on compliance and reporting and things of that nature. You can find them outlined in the final rule, which the link is here. It's also on our website. The uniform administrative requirements, the 2 CFR 200 policy requirements that I mentioned, they are also outlined in our post-award FAQs. They're outlined on the website with a link to 2 CFR 200 and the applicable policy requirements. Again, it's on the web page for this too, so you know what to expect for the policy requirements. I can make this any bigger. Hang on one second, guys. All right, can you guys still see my screen? Can you see what I'm sharing? Perfect, okay. Couldn't see it very well, so I wanted to make it bigger. Okay, so for the webinar, the objectives we're going to cover, I'm going to just cover recognizing the obligation for the federal requirements and resources, identifying the next steps in the award process, which we call our post-award process, identifying your key grant documents and where to find those, and just becoming familiar with the available grant resources that we have here at OPB for you. And then lastly, just understanding the resources for audit requirements. We're going to go over an overview of the program. As we discussed, award next steps. Some of these it's an iterative process. We're updating some of our processes, trying to make them much more efficient for you all, and electronic versus a manual process. We'll briefly touch on reporting, and then David will go through the audits information with you. Grant overview, everybody's obviously familiar with this as you did apply for the grant. So the Georgia Investments in Housing Grant is for nonprofits that are 501c3 or 19 tax exempt organizations who provide affordable housing and aid individuals in experiencing homelessness. The program is intended to support nonprofit housing projects, applications that aid individuals in experiencing homelessness. Again, the performance period is the date of onboarding completion, which we refer to as the grant approval, through October 31st, 2026. The eligible use of funds. Again, as I mentioned, this aligns to the Housing Trust Fund or the Home Investment Partnership. Again, taken from final rule. I won't reiterate these, as I'm sure you're all familiar with the eligible use of funds under these programs, as in our application and on our website. Again, as I noted earlier, home and housing trust fund programs use different income limits than the definition of low and moderate income adopted by Treasury, and this is what our program will use. Although state, local fiscal recovery funds allow for a broad range of use, the award funding under this grant will align to the programs and eligible activities we've outlined on this one. I think sometimes it gets a little bit confusing as folks often refer to final rule or what other states are doing. Georgia has taken a very conservative approach with regard to what we are funding, as Treasury does not pre-approve projects. So we really look to make sure that it's an enumerated use, and we're very aligned to final rule. And so just to reiterate, that low and moderate income adopted by Treasury, that is what we will be using for the AMI and FPG of the program. So I mentioned the 2 CFR 200. Here are the applicable sections of the 2 CFR 200 policy requirements that apply to this assistance listing. Again, this program is funded through the state fiscal recovery funds. So you have subpart B, general provisions, subpart C, pre-federal award requirements and contents of federal awards, subpart D, post-federal award requirements, subpart E, cost principles, and subpart F, audit requirements. Again, these are all super important. You could spend hours and hours coming through these and just digesting it. So we do strongly recommend that you, if you're not familiar with these guidelines, that you are familiar with them, because you will see these pop up again in your audits, in your reporting, etc. And we definitely want to highlight two of these. While they're all equally important, there are two specifically that we want to highlight as they are the most common questions that we receive. That is subpart D, post-federal award requirements. This is where you're going to find your competitive procurement guidelines for your contract selections, etc. And then subpart F, which I've already alluded to, is the audit requirements. Anyone receiving $750,000 or more in federal funds are required to do single audits. This is just an overview of the procurement standards outlined in that 2 CFR 200 section. And this is just a notation that recipients are responsible for ensuring that any procurement using state, local fiscal recovery funds or payments under procurement contracts using such funds are consistent with the procurement standards set forth in the uniform guidance for those applicable subparts. And again, it requires infrastructure for competitive bidding, contractor oversight, including maintaining written standards of conduct and prohibitions on dealing with suspended or debarred parties. So just making sure that you're in line with that. We've put the Treasury reporting and compliance guide in there. That is also a supplement document that we use for reporting, but it does talk through the compliance aspect of everything. So if you're ever curious to know what we are required to report on, that is a really good guide. And that trickles down to our sub-grantees. There's a link there right under this too. We have an OPB short guide on procurement. It looks similar to this. And we created this as literally just that, a short guide to a very complex subpart under 2 CFR 200, just to assist you all with, so that we could try to help you kind of see what those purchasing thresholds look like, what they require out of a sub-grantee, and what you should document. I know David's going to hit on this, but it really is about documenting your methodology. Document. So that is what we're trying to impart with you. So you can go to our website, the For Grantees page under the important documents houses all of our important documents, but including this procurement short guide. Subpart F, audit requirements. If you guys can mute your speakers, that would be great. Thank you. Again, audits are required. Your single audit, non-federal entity that expends $750,000 or more. I don't want to sound like a broken record. The records must be available for review or audit by appropriate officials. Again, our RSM auditors will be doing our subrecipient monitoring, and then they need to also be available for when and if OPB gets their federal audits. This is really important. So designation of subrecipients and contractors. So all of you are subrecipients. OPB is the pass-through prime recipient of these funds, and you are the subrecipients. So the folks that you're entering into contract with, I don't think that many of you have subawards. They should inherently be contractors, but that determination is extremely important. Once you have signed terms and conditions, if you have these questions that RSM can help you field as far as going through procurement and designating folks, et cetera, we're happy to kind of help facilitate that connection and help you guys when you're making your designations for contractors if you have been approved already for subawards. All right, and I'm going to turn it over to Shelley for the next steps for awards.
Thank you, Jen. Good morning, everyone. Again, I'm Shelley Toms. I'm your program specialist for the housing grant. Again, welcome to this webinar. I just want to take the opportunity to go through some of the next steps that we will all need to follow to get our projects on the road. So we're going to go through this awardee checklist. All applicants must complete the following list of items prior to submitting a request for reimbursement. Each program has an OPB grant specialist assigned to the program specialist as a program specialist, to assist awardees with any questions or concerns through the process. This information can be found on the 4 Grantees webpage, linked below. As you will see, the SAMs, your UEI, numbers you need to access through SAMS. A lot of you have already done that. Some of you are still waiting. There's a slow process on sam.gov. So as early as possible, we reiterated before, please get that request in. Terms and conditions, vendor management forms, your budgets, and everything else that needs to be submitted so that you can become fully active and approved. Again, a reminder about that UEI number, SAMs through sam.gov. You will not be able to sign your terms and conditions without having your UEI number available to enter onto the form. If you have challenges with that, please reach out to me. Let me know what is happening so we understand where you are in the process. So your terms and conditions is an agreement outlining the terms of your award called terms and conditions. It will be sent to you after your award notification has been sent. While the time frame for sending this differs by program, once sent, this document will need to be signed by an authorized official to accept the terms and conditions of your award. They should have been sent to all round 1 and round 2 grantees at this point, or they're forthcoming for the round 2 folks. They will come from an email, Adobe Sign at adobesign.com. Sorry, 1 second. And they must be signed within 60 days. Sorry. So that's an update from our last presentation. And there is a user guide under the 4 Grantees website to reference in response to any questions you have while doing the terms and conditions. And you may delegate additional users in your organization to handle those pieces. This is just a snapshot of what this would look like when you go in to sign to delegate your terms and conditions. It's an editable form and you can just slide down to the bottom of the form where you see that green rectangle and you can delegate whichever members of your organization you'd like to sign those terms and conditions. It's just a bigger view of that where you can change the names and put in whichever staff person or legal people, whoever is representing your organization that would be responsible for this portion. There is also a wonderful step-by-step video on the OPB website to assist you with delegating these terms and conditions. It can be found under the For Grantees section, then under webinars and tutorials, or you can click the link below. So when you go back to this PowerPoint at the end of this webinar, feel free to click that link and it'll get you right to the video. So it'll walk you through any challenges you might have in delegating that. Awardees will then receive an email from the OPB's grant management system, Georgia Grants, to facilitate account setup and award management. This email would go to the point of contact listed on the awardee's application. The Georgia Grants portal user guide with instructions on adding users can be found under the important documents section on our For Grantees website. So please check down under that important documents section. I know some of you all miss it, but there's so much good information there that will be vital to this process. To facilitate payments to grantees, awardees must be registered as a vendor with the state and provide information to accept electronic ACH payments. To facilitate payments for grantees, awardees must be registered as a vendor with the state. That's those wonderful supplier vendor management forms that there's a link to on the next steps. And updating your bank account information and all the contact information that's needed. You'll be required to upload a completed Form W-9, the 2018 IRS version. So if you're using an older version, make sure when you look at the bottom of the form that it does say 2018, because that is what our state accounting office will accept. And you can find that at irs.gov. And there is a website link to the vendor management form that is on the grantee website. We're in the process of updating that, so it will be an electronically submitted form on the website. But at this present moment, for those of you who are submitting your vendor management forms and W-9 forms, you are sending it to that grant forms mailbox that's listed on the instruction sheet for the vendor management submission. Okay, final budget approval. Before submitted reimbursement request, you must submit a final detailed budget worksheet and capital expenditure form. It's a treasury requirement. So some of you may not be used to submitting the capital expenditure form, but please pay attention that this is a treasury requirement for this housing grant. This budget is project specific. Grantees will be assigned a programmatic grant specialist, me, to review the budget and provide the final approval. Grantees will receive final approval in the Georgia Grants portal for their approved budget. Below are some links to the budget worksheet and the budget worksheet guide that can be found on the OPB website under the For Grantees section. Then important documents and guides. And these are live links, so you'll be able to access them right through this presentation. Final budget should contain OPB State Fiscal Recovery Fund grant-related project costs only. Please do not include project costs that will be funded with fund sources outside of the ARPA State Fiscal Recovery Funds. Match funds should not be included in your final budget. Contracts or services, etc., are subject to 2 CFR 200 procurement requirements. As such, if these contracts, etc., do not align with federal guidance, do not include them in your final budget submitted to OPB. Fund sources outside of ARPA funds awarded should follow any requirements or restrictions for the fund source use. And that's just reiterating some of the information that Jen previously explained to us earlier. Okay, so a budget revision increases or decreases specific budget category line items, but does not affect the total awarded amounts. So your budgets are not going to go up or should not go down, but they definitely will not be going up. So you can change what you need to in keeping with cost adjustments that you need to make, but please make sure that your final awarded amount is still the same. You can do that because you have changes in key persons specified in the application or the award, disengagement from the project, costs that require prior approval, or the transfer of funds budgeted for participant support costs to other categories of expense. A change in scope occurs when the recipient proposes to change the objectives, aims, or purposes identified in the approved application. Grant recipients must submit a change in scope request in order to change the scope or objectives for federally supported projects. Just an example, if a site location is different than what you originally proposed, you do need to submit that on the change in scope form, and we will review it for approval. And these are other reasons that you may want to use that change in scope amendment. So please go ahead and submit that if that's something that is necessary for your project to continue. Okay, what to include in your request? Email the request for budget revision to your program specialist with budget revision request, your Georgia award number. You all should be assigned a Georgia Grants award number at this point in the subject line. Put in a cover letter, your updated project narrative, your updated budget worksheet with line item justifications. And any additional items that may be requested by your program specialist, I will definitely reach out to you to let you know what those are. I'm going to turn it over to Jonna now, who's going to walk us through this very delicate payment process and how to make those requests.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jonna West. Congratulations again on your grant awards. I know everybody's excited to get started. So we're going to walk through the payment request process to the extent that we can. Until you're in the system, it's going to be a little bit hard for you to see that, but there's a very good template. I know that we've talked about that for Grantee's website that has information, and Amanda put that in the chat box. So there's a link to that in the chat from this meeting, and I encourage everybody to go there. Hey, if y'all could mute your lines, that would be very helpful. I'm sorry, we're getting some feedback. Okay, so Amanda put that link for the For Grantees site in the chat box for this meeting, and I encourage everybody to go there and view this information that we've been sharing. I know most of you probably already have started looking through that. But when you're ready to submit payment requests, you're going to submit those through the Georgia Grants portal. There is a payment template that you'll need to download to fill out, that you will submit with all your payment requests. That again is on that For Grantee's website. Again, it's very important that you have that vendor management form on file. And you'll be required to do that. You will not be able to get a payment reimbursement until that's on file, because that gives us the ability to deposit those payments in your bank account. That those payments are directly through ACH. So make sure that you have those on file, because once your payment is approved, that's how it will be submitted. On that For Grantee's website, there's a very good video and step-by-step instructions on how to submit a payment request. Again, I encourage everybody to go and review that on the website, just so you're familiar with the portal, so that you understand how it works. Shelley's always going to be your resource and is available to provide technical assistance and help you with that. But you probably want to review that video before you even attempt to upload a payment request, so that you're familiar with the portal and how it works. When you provide your payment request, you're going to use that template that's on the website, but you're also going to upload your documentation. It is very important that you keep track of all the documentation for your expenses. You're going to have to provide copies of invoices. You're going to have to provide proof of payment. These are reimbursement grants, remember, so you have to be able to show whether it's through your bank statements or canceled checks. You're going to have to show proof of payment. So keep track of all your documentation. You can see in that payment template, there's some examples of documentation that you'll find very helpful. That payment template is going to have budget categories. So every time you submit a reimbursement request, you're going to do those by category: personnel, fringe, travel, equipment, supplies, contracts, consultants, subawards, and other. And again, there'll be examples. We talked about the payment request template. Again, encourage you all to go to this For Grantees website and become familiar with that in the video. I think that's all we're going to cover on the payment requests. Again, it's very difficult to show you exactly and walk through that until you're all set up in the portal and have access to that. So again, watch the video, learn how that's going to work, and reach out to Shelly when you're ready to start submitting payment requests. Contact Shelly so she can help you walk through that. All right. Thanks so much.
I won't let me in. Oh.
Guys, if you could mute if you just joined us. There you go. Right, so any updates for the point of contact for authorized users? We have a form for this. It's an authorized user designation survey. Much like other federal grants, when you actually receive the award, you designate your authorized officials. We have done that in the application for you, so that's why the point of contact is determined at the application status when you designate that person. If that changes or anybody needs additional access, the primary user can either go in and add it, or you can request a change, a deletion of somebody that's no longer there, or an addition of someone else by just doing the authorized user form. You will need a signature from an authorized official with the requester's organization or entity on letterhead to validate that that requested contact be added to the grant. That is both for our protection and your own. That's just to ensure that the person that you designate has the official capacity to sign legal agreements, go in and request funds for you, et cetera. The reporting requirements, our outlined requirements from Treasury can be found in the compliance and reporting guide. That gets updated quite frequently. It can be found here. This URL is updated. OPB may request additional information from that. It will be based on quarterly reporting, and you won't be required to submit anything unless you've sent over any expenditures for reimbursement, unless you've had it rejected or kicked back, or we need to request some like programmatic information from you. And that could change depending on what Treasury changes to. All right, so environmental review and historic preservation. Section 106 of NHPA does not apply to Treasury administration of state fiscal recovery funds, including funds expended under revenue loss, public health and negative economic impacts, water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure eligible use categories. Projects supported with payments from the funds may still be subject to Section 106 of the NHPA if they involve participation from other federal agencies, including from other federal financial assistance programs, or subject to receipt of approvals from other federal agencies. So we say all that to say, if you have other federal funding or other federal participation, check those policy requirements, because it still may be subject to Section 106 for anything funded solely by state fiscal recovery funds. If there's no other federal involvement, then this does not apply. State environmental review process under Environmental Protection Division is applicable to these projects. for the construction. We will have more information for you on these, and you can find again in the post-award FAQs. We take it, we have the information by grant type, et cetera, so you can find a lot of useful information there. All right, David, if you're ready, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jen. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. So as Jen has alluded to, RSM has been engaged by the state to provide both risk assessment and grant monitoring services related to these funds. As such, we will be involved in several different components of this process. Shelley mentioned the detailed budget worksheet reviews that she performs. We support her in that effort. And so some of the prior communications about providing detailed schedules and breakdowns related to that budget are important for our process as we go through and perform feasibility and reasonableness assessments of some of the costs included in those budgets. And we're also involved in the payment review process. I know Jonna explained in short order a pretty detailed and robust process that exists through the Grant Care portal, where you will upload certain information and that will be reviewed by a level 1 reviewer and a level 2 reviewer prior to it being approved. And so on the next slide, I'll kind of share some of the specific documentation that really has already been discussed during this process, but I just want to highlight. And then in addition to the budgets and the level 1 payment reviews, RSM will also be performing monitoring activities really in the form of interim and closeout audits of your projects. So we will be requesting certain documentation related to the procurement and expenditures that hopefully you upload and attach to your payment request. But we're also going to be conducting interviews with your project management team members. We'll be conducting site visits for some projects based on complexity, size, and risk. We also will be confirming that required permits have been obtained. We'll be monitoring those Davis-Bacon requirements as well as any other labor standards that exist on the project. Confirming that environmental reviews have been completed and various other site activities. We usually conduct labor interviews when we go into the field to validate Davis-Bacon and prevailing wage when it's applicable. But also one of the objectives of this monitoring effort is to prevent and detect and deter fraud. And so we will ask questions that sometimes maybe seem a bit uncomfortable, but we'd like to give people the opportunity to disclose in addition to the resources that the state provides through whistleblower hotlines and things like that. We like to ask those questions to confirm that laborers and subcontractors and contractors aren't aware of any fraudulent or nefarious acts that are being perpetrated on your project. So everybody loves to see the auditor coming, but it is a necessary component of a federal program like this and something that our firm does on behalf of state governments all across the country. So on this slide, I did mention the budgets and the level of detail being very important for us to be able to conduct those reviews. We understand that some projects may not have a detailed construction estimate from a contractor yet. And so we would ask that the level of detail you provide in that budget detail worksheet be the deepest level that's available to you at this point. So we understand that there may be an architectural or engineering estimate that provides some high level baselines or benchmarks for depicting the overall soft cost or hard cost of the project. We would just ask that you provide the greatest level of detail possible. And in some instances, we may request a justification or a narrative that explains where you are in the process if, in fact, there are line items in your budget that do not have detailed unit level pricing, so that later on we can come back and confirm and validate those assertions that you made early in your process. And so that we know from an auditing and monitoring perspective that there may be components of your budget that we want to track budget to actual more closely to make sure that we're all aware of potential budget overruns or the need for budget revisions as the project progresses. As far as the payment application and really the focus on procurement and disbursements, I just wanted to kind of highlight some of the procurement related documents that we generally require to be included in support of your payment requests. As Jen mentioned, 2 CFR 200, really specifically 320, provides multiple options for how to procure based on the size of the contract that you are procuring. Jen provided a quick shot of the chart that shows the different types of procurement that 2 CFR 200 320 outlines. And so pursuant to that end, the advertisement of the project, of the solicitation package itself, the bids from bidding contractors, the evaluations of those bids, and then the contracts and or purchase orders that result from the award of those bids are all documents that we would expect to be provided with your initial payment request to support that you have been through a competitive process and that the vendors or contractors you are seeking reimbursement for were procured in a manner compliant with the guidance that I referenced. Jen also mentioned the Appendix 2, which I can provide a link in the chat in a minute after I get done to everyone, but 2 CFR 200 does have Appendix 2 to Part 200, which is a specific set of contractual provisions that the federal government requires contractors include in their agreements. It does outline things like Davis-Bacon and fair labor standards and other specific requirements that are to be included in all federal contracts. So as I mentioned, you providing those contracts and purchase orders with your payment request. If it doesn't have Appendix 2 to Part 200 included in that package, we will generally ask that you amend your contract to include those provisions, and you'll probably get written up in an audit finding, from our team in your interim or closeout audit to state that, your contract originally didn't have that. As long as you amend it in, it will be deemed acceptable, but we'd love to head that off here and just remind you guys to include those provisions in all of your contract arrangements. So after the procurement to contracting process, as Jonna mentioned, there are a significant number of supporting documents that have to be included to evidence that you have incurred and paid the costs that you're seeking reimbursement for. Those types of documents include invoices from contractors. They include payroll registers. They include other supporting documents. In some instances, for labor transactions, we do seek codes of conduct and HR policies to validate some of the attributes included in the payroll registers. And then, of course, proof of payment. So one thing that we frequently see when payment requests are submitted is, let's say a list of transactions that we're seeking reimbursement for is included in the payment request template, but there's not a corresponding invoice to tie to every single line item. We're going to tie every single line item. And if you request reimbursement for a transaction and you don't have an invoice or you don't have a payroll register or your invoices don't have supporting proof of payments, even if it's a $50 transaction, we'll kick it back and we're going to require that you produce that support. And as Jen mentioned, we do have a set timeline for those payment request reimbursements. So when you receive feedback from a PA submission, whether it be a return or other communication through the grants portal, there is a timeline that we follow, and those payment requests will be rejected if you don't respond to those comments in a timely fashion. So please be attentive to returned PA requests. Please provide all of the supporting documentation up front in the PA to reduce the number of returns and back and forth that we have to go through. It just makes everybody's lives easier. And you know, I think one thing, the last bullet here that I just want to highlight is as I mentioned, we do intend to reach out to your project management teams. We do intend to communicate with your contractors and your subcontractors and laborers in the field. So we would ask that you let your teams know that this program exists, so that when requests come from RSM or from Shelley and the OPB team related to any information tied to monitoring or your audits, your A133 audits, your financial statement audits, any of that support, we just ask that you be responsive and that you let everybody know that this process is happening so that you're prepared when those requests come through. So Jen, I hope that covers, I know we could talk about this for hours, but I hope that covers kind of some of the key points that we wanted to drive home, and I'm happy to answer questions or provide any more information that you see fit.
Yeah, before we get to questions, I just want to piggyback off a couple of things that you said with regards to the payment request that Jonna talked through and your level 1, level 2 that you mentioned. I just wanted to kind of drive home, help us help you. We really want to get these, our internal time frame for reviewing these. Everyone always wants to know, like, when can I expect payment? We get them reviewed within 48 hours. Now, whether that is approved and sent on for payment or kicked back for revision because it's missing supporting documentation or it's too difficult to kind of piece it all together, please don't send us in the kitchen sink. Kitchen sink PA requests are really difficult to turn back around in a short time frame that you all want to get paid in. And the second part of that is if you're missing one piece of information or we can't tie it all out, it all goes back to you. So if you have a $1 million request as your first one, that's going to get held up. So rather than sending in everything that you've already done, separating it into multiple PAs or DEXPs, direct expenses that we call them, it may make more sense if you have personnel involved to submit it just for the personnel, and then submit it for the construction costs, and then submit it for equipment or whatever, to break it down to improve your chances of getting those pushed through at a faster rate. That would be helpful for us, and again, helpful for you, because we can get them reviewed and route it out to you guys, to your bank accounts faster. So that's one point I wanted to drive home. Secondly, Davis-Bacon is tricky for us, I feel like, because there is a Treasury FAQ that essentially says that Davis-Bacon is not applicable to state fiscal recovery funds, but then it goes on further to say that states will be required to report on Davis-Bacon for any projects that have a total project cost of 10 million or more. So it is required. That FAQ is confusing for sure, but again, we want to make it very clear that that is applicable. So I just wanted to highlight that because we get questions about that often. And then, as David mentioned, they are going to be reaching out to your team. We obviously are going to be talking to your team as well from an onboarding standpoint. We just ask that, we know you're all working with engineers, et cetera. We ask that when those conversations happen, the subrecipient is there. So if an engineer has a question from OPB, it is our responsibility to impart the knowledge, the expectations, and the guidelines to our subrecipients. We're happy to include you if the subrecipient wants you in that conversation. But aside from that, we really have to be talking to our subrecipient. So just please keep that in mind. So if you do tend to email us, we will loop back in the subrecipient to make sure that they are aware of the contact that is being made, so that any knowledge that we impart is imparted straight from OPB. So if you see those. Again, wanted to highlight 60 days instead of 30 days for signing of the terms and conditions. If you feel like you aren't going to sign that, please let us know as soon as possible. I think that was it. Yeah. Perfect. And then here are additional resources for you all. The state local fiscal recovery compliance and reporting guide, the final rule, interim final rule is in here because it also refers to interim final rule in the final rule. Again, your 2 CFR 200 reporting or policy requirements, compliance supplement that tells you what we will be audited on and what auditors will be looking for, and the assistance listing as well. Stop sharing. I'll share back in 1 second with all our contacts again, but I know there's some questions in the chat that I want to get to. So Elaine's asking, when should we expect an invite code for the grant portal to have access to that? You should have already received it. If you have not, please email Shelly and we can make sure we get that for you. How do you show payment for personnel? So you should have some sort of payroll system. You will either have a check that you have paid that employee with, or you'll have an ACH transfer from their bank if you have direct deposit. So that's how we expect that payment to personnel is shown. Please confirm multiple reimbursement requests are okay to send each month. We prefer it month to month. If you look at the post-award FAQs, there is explicit instruction on the time frame for payment requests. Anything that is not, so for example, if you're cleared and your project starts on 11/1 and we're receiving things, in March of next year for the month that you were cleared in, that is past our 90-day mark. It's really 30 days that we expect to see that in. If it's past 90 days, we have discretion to reject it. So please just take a look at the post-award FAQs on those policies that we have. If you forget something, obviously, we're not going to be like, no, you can't submit that, but we would like to see monthly reimbursement requests. We do understand that, payroll cuts off at different times. People's, fiscal years end at different times and things like that. So as long as Shelly understands your situation, we just ask for the communication on that. I think everything else has been answered by our team. Oh,
Just the answer.
oh, okay, yeah. I was going to do the chat first. So let's see. All right, so there are a couple hands up. Let me see if I can get to them. Joe Collins, you have a question? Oh, you're on mute.
Joe?
If you can put it in the chat, for some reason, his mic's still,
Will Johnson.
Will Johnson, yeah, Will Johnson.
Hey, so my question is, sorry, I asked about the personnel. So since ours isn't the full payment for the personnel, so again, we're only paying a partial of the salary. So I'm just curious how we represent that in collecting reimbursement. So like showing, is it time cards allocated to the project? Or how do you want that broken down to make sure we're meeting your expectations for reimbursement?
Yep, so that's a great question. So I misunderstood your question. So yeah, so in that instance, if it's percentage spent on the grant and it's not a fully funded position, then we would expect to see a time card or a timesheet with the hours that they worked and your percentage or time spent on State Fiscal Recovery Fund projects, this project, in addition to, so that's your supporting documentation. So your payroll, that, and then the proof of payment to that employee, which would then kick in your ACH or your check or something like that. Does that make sense?
Yes. So again, even if we all have salaried positions and a partial of this grant is going to that. So it would be time cards, and then you would show that we are paid, and then the amount of time allocated that month, we would show the, I guess, amount, and then show that they have been paid in full on the salary.
So you're going to go to our payment request template that was mentioned earlier.
Yep.
And in that personnel tab, it's kind of broken down already for you. So you'll put the person's name in, the amount, the percentage spent on the grant, and then the amount, and that should calculate for you. And then your supporting documentation would be the timesheet, the payroll, and then, the proof of payment, whatever that,
Wonderful.
So yeah, the payment template will do it for you.
Thank you.
Phil Ellen.
Phil, you have a question? Did we lose you, Phil?
No, hang on one second. Can you hear me now?
Okay. Yeah, I
Okay.
can.
Go ahead, Joe.
Hey, this is Joe. I hope you can hear me, Jennifer.
Yep, I can.
Okay. I'm asking a question, and I apologize to all those folks on the phone that are not involved in a low-income housing tax credit deal. but I know several are, and that's what ours is Paladin Inc. And I heard you mention the approach on the applicability of all of 2 CFR 200, which I do appreciate, but we have been in contact, of course, with our tax attorneys, and there is a major concern about for tax credit deals in a lot of these situations that the strict application of that will trigger conflict of interest provisions that would actually prevent us from being able to use the funds, which of course would be highly unfortunate. But the concern is that if the applicant, if the nonprofit recipient is involved in any way in the project, whether as the developer, as the owner, even as a land seller, it creates a conflict of interest. And that would cause, there's concern that would cause us to not be able to use the funds at all. I think the good news is that this has been encountered nationally, and there are other states have applied the final rule because there is flexibility that under loan structures, which is what we're proposing, that certain parts of 2 CFR 200 apply, but other parts don't. And that's been the way that tax credit deals have been able to be utilized. So we just wanted to know if what you all have heard about that issue, because I know you've probably looked into it. And if we need to have a different call to get into the weeds, of course, we're glad to. But we did just want to bring that up because that's emerged as a major concern for these tax credit deals.
Yeah, no, you bring up a good question. So we did respond to you that we were checking into it, but I can tell you, so how other states are applying their interpretation of final rule is completely separate from Georgia. Again, going back to our discussion earlier, we are taking a very conservative approach and we are going strictly by final rule and the assistance listing. And until Treasury changes that to say that 2 CFR 200, there's an exclusion for tax credits on loan structures for housing, we've got to abide by the federal requirements that are set forth in the final rule, aligning to 2 CFR 200 based on the act. So we don't have the flexibility to do that based on our conservative structure with this. Again, if other states are doing that, they will have to answer to Treasury and show their methodology on why they did that. But to date, our 2 CFR 200 is applicable across the board to all of our subrecipients.
So just a question so that doesn't clear up the conflict of interest, what Joe asked about, because that would disqualify all the tax credit deals that have conflict of interest, right?
If 2 CFR 200 creates an issue where you would have a conflict of interest that would not align to the criteria we've set up with this program, then so that would disqualify you then. But we can certainly talk about that. But yes, 2 CFR 200 is applicable. If that creates a conflict of interest, those are the guidelines that we are, that is the criteria of the program.
So that our understanding, of course, is that would apply if nonprofit is in the GP, just the owner, which I think will apply to several folks as the developer, which is our case, or even if the recipient is the selling the land. Anytime you have a financial interest. Now, we didn't know this at the time. We're not attorneys, but as folks have dug into the weeds, there's a real concern that unfortunately that conflict of interest might be a huge barrier. So we appreciate the feedback, and we hope that it can be more easily resolved. But we may need to circle back with you on that.
Yeah, like I said, we're still internally discussing this and getting DCA involved, et cetera, and things like that. But I just want to make clear, so the 2 CFR 200 requirements attached to this program are in that application on the website, et cetera. So again, it's the subrecipient's responsibility to understand what that means too, and knowing that those criteria have to be met. But certainly where there is flexibility allowed under our program structure, we will take that into consideration. And we are, like I said, we're internally discussing that and looking at our options and things like that. So.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, Cindy. We're in the same room, so Shelley's telling me who all is got their hand raised.
Well, this will be an easier question than the other one. So when you're talking about competitive procurement or bidding, is there a minimum or everything has to be on a procurement or bidding?
That's a good question. So again, if you look back at the short guide that we created, it's all in 2 CFR 200, which again, I understand is ginormous, but since that we created that short guide to kind of provide you some assistance, there's different thresholds for what triggers like RFP proposals, et cetera. David, you can, if you want to add to that, but there are different thresholds. So, you know, if it's a under the standard acquisition threshold, et cetera, there are different options for you.
Yeah, I can jump in. So 2 CFR 200-320 outlines a couple different options. So there are informal procurement methods. One of those is a micro purchase, which does not require competitive bidding. This federal guideline for a micro purchase is $10,000. However, if you have met certain criteria, you may request a self-certification to increase your micro purchase threshold up to $50,000. It should be noted that individual transactions are not the measuring stick for this. It's the aggregate of transactions to a vendor. So if you buy $9,000 worth of stuff from the same contractor 4 times, you know, we're going to look at that as a $40,000 transaction, not for individual $9,000 transactions. So just be aware that the aggregation of payments to the contractor is what sets that threshold. Now, above $50,000, there is a small purchase option that 2 CFR 200-320 outlines, which it basically allows for price or rate quotations to be obtained from an adequate number of qualified sources, which is determined by the non-federal entity. Generally, I think universally across the world of bidding, we think that 3 bids is what most people should obtain. If you get more, that's great, but that is a small purchase which exists between 10 or 50,000, depending on your micro purchase threshold, and the simplified acquisition threshold, which is set today at $250,000. If the purchase is in excess of $250,000, there are 2 options that 2 CFR 200-320 provide. One is a sealed bid option, and one is a proposals option. The sealed bid option is, as it states, a sealed bid where the lowest cost provider is selected. A proposals option includes multiple criteria, including price as a factor, where the contractor would be selected based on the set evaluation criteria that was disclosed in the solicitation. The last option, which we would prefer to not have to use, but we understand is a situation that does arise, is a non-competitive procurement. The state has produced a sole source justification or a non-competitive procurement justification form, which we can provide a link to in the chat. But there are very specific criteria that have to exist in order for that to be allowable, and we will review those and we will reject those if they don't meet the criteria. And one of the key provisions of that is demonstrating that the costs are reasonable related to that non-competitive procurement. And so there are multiple ways that you can evaluate the cost reasonableness and demonstrate that to us, but there must be support. Conflicts of interest is addressed in that. So to the earlier point about the LIHTC deals, I think, you know, that's something that we have to probably take offline and consider as we go through this process. But those are the different options available to you and the different relevant thresholds. But that stuff is easily outlined in the chart that Jen provided in their short guide to procurement.
Right. Thank you.
More questions in the chat. Go back up. If you need to submit a change in project from the original grant project, how does that need to be submitted? Can you submit an alternate project? At this stage in the game, we are not going to be submitting, awarding any scope changes. So if your project was not in your initial application and you are not going to continue with that, then we are not changing that, unless it was just a small scope change from your project, if that makes sense. You can submit that. We can take a look just in case we're misunderstanding the question. There's a scope change form that is online in that for grantees important documents section. We can link that here as well, but that is what you will need to submit. I would just go ahead and submit it so we can just take a look at it. So that way we're just, again, not misunderstanding something. It may be something small, even though you're saying alternate project. So it may be just something small that we would accept. So I would just highly recommend putting it in, letting us review that, and then we'll get back to you. That's how you submit that scope change. Do competitive procurement rules, here you go, David, you ready? Do competitive procurement rules require multiple general contractor bids, or can we select a general contractor or rely on bidding at the sub and trade level? So I think you just covered that.
Yeah, I did. Competitive bidding is required at the GC level, the prime contractor level, and it's certainly encouraged at the subcontractor level. And if you are utilizing cost reimbursable contracts, part of our audits and monitoring process will be to obtain an understanding of which subcontractors were selected. And we will be reviewing the invoices from those subcontractors to the prime contractor and conducting interviews with those subcontractors, especially those whose contract values are in excess of the simplified acquisition threshold of $250,000.
Thank you. Rob's asking if we are an awardee for a joint application with another organization. Is the other organization a sub-grantee or something else? I hate leading with this, but it depends. I would have to go back and look at your application and what you submitted them as and look at the relationship of that and get back to you. So if you want to email Shelley some more information on that, we can get back to you today on that. Let's see, some link requests. The overall project is the same, just the change in location of the project. So that is something we would likely consider. So again, if you just submit it, so we have the entire context of that, we can take a look at that for you. Perfect. And then for the budget revisions, we will have a form up there for you as well. So you won't have to submit it in an email to Shelley with the content there. You will just submit the form to her so we can review that for budget revisions and update your revisions as well as the scope change stuff. So again, if you have completely different projects, that is not something we would take at this time because it has to be part of that original project in your application. So it sounds like you guys have a smaller scope change. So. Rob, do you have another question?
Yeah, if this is kind of our first time dealing with the federal grant and we need to hire somebody to make sure we ensure compliance, it would be helpful for us to bring that person on kind of on the front end. But I also want to make, and one question is, is that an eligible expense, right, for the grant to hire somebody to make sure we manage it well? And if so, how do we make sure we bring them on in a way that's compliant if we're still figuring out the compliance? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so a couple of things to untangle in that. So first and foremost, if it wasn't in your initial application request, that's a complete budget amendment. So we would have to approve that. If it wasn't in your initial application to bring on someone for compliance, you would have to move funds. Yep. Right? Depending on what, I'd have to see your application in context and everything. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, remember, we will not, you cannot submit a reimbursement request for anything that was prior to when your award was approved. So consider that in your decision to do that as well. And then thirdly, it still has to align to 2 CFR 200. And I know that's not the answer you want to hear, but goods or services, no matter what it is, it still has to align. So you're still going to have to go through that methodology. I know it's not fun, but unfortunately, again, they're federal funds and they have those stipulations to them. So we just want to make sure we don't get clawback. So we're protecting you guys against it too. Deborah Black, you have a question?
Yes, I asked the question earlier about the change in project. The overall project has not changed. The grant was for 20 homes. The only thing that's changing is the location. The land that the property that we were initially going to purchase is not available. So we needed to get a new location. So the overall project, everything is the same. The only thing that's changing is the location. That's it.
Got it. Yes, ma'am.
So
So
that's
that,
why I
again,
was
that's,
asking.
yeah, that sounds like it's just an easy explanation. So in the scope change form, there are boxes for you to put in like the impact, the reason, and how it would impact your award and things like that. And so if you get that over to Shelley, we will review that and send you back any approvals. If we have any other questions, we'll have that dialogue with you to get that resolved. Get it approved and just make sure that your final budget still aligns to all that when it gets in the system.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for the update. Sorry, I'm bouncing forward between chat and okay. If the nonprofit is also serving as the project developer, who should the developer's fee be structured in the budget submission request? So your budget submission request is from the subrecipient level. So if there's a developer contract, as David was saying earlier about contract, detail level, et cetera, you'll put it on the contract line. I think it'd be helpful if you look at the budget template in context too, to kind of see how we've arranged that. You put it in the contract line, but this is not where whoever received the award, who received the notice of funding, who put in the application, who put their UEI number in, you are the subrecipient. You are the one that will fill out the budget for any subawards, any contracts, any supplies, equipment, et cetera. So it just depends on who the primary subrecipient was. Any other questions? I know we're 12 minutes over. All right. Well, again, we'll have this recording available for you all with the slides. We'll make sure we have the corrections on the terms and conditions before we post that. Again, we highly encourage you to visit the post-award FAQ document that we have. Come through the 2 CFR 200 requirements to make sure that you can sign terms and conditions to align to the project. And if you have any other questions, please reach out to Shelley. We will confer on answers, and anybody who needs to discuss it offline for things we've previously discussed, we will get back with you. And again, we're still internally discussing that. I appreciate your time so much. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thank you.